faint blue dot, as Carl Sagan once called it, is teeming with life, all varieties of life. And it's an interesting point here that you might want to consider. Everything on this planet is in the continual process of dying. The Stoic philosopher Seneca said that death is something that's happening to each one of us right now. None of us are going to escape it. So part of the question that I want us to kind of explore tonight is, how do we die? That's the question, and I think it's one of nature's greatest questions. This is how we begin to set ourselves up for success in life. This moment is dying to make room for the next moment. And then that moment dies to make room for the next moment. This is present in seasons. It's present last night as it gave way to today. Everything is always in the process of dying. So the question really isn't, how do we live? It's really, how do we die? And that question keeps us in the present. Did I die a meaningful death today rather than live a meaningless life? And that spot between my first breath and my last breath, I get to choose how I fill that. And really, if we follow nature's example, we're going to be able to do that pretty well, individually, and I think more importantly, as businesses and as a society. I grew up on a farm in rural Oregon, and I remember as a little kid walking around, and after the planting, I was just struck by the magic of germination. It's kind of like, out of that tiny little seed, where did this thing come from? And this thing would end up being an 8-foot-tall stalk of corn. The wind would blow, the rain would fall, and just the dancing that went on. We'd mow the hay and the smell of the hay. Nature was just filled with life, and it was always dying. Seasons moved into different seasons. The crops got harvested. Everything just kind of transitioned. There was a boreal forest not too far from our farm, and I would remember again as a kid, my brother and I, we'd go hiking, and we'd play Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. I'm going to really date myself on that one. But we'd be climbing trees, and all these little insects, all of them dying, all of them having a purpose, all of them doing what they did, and they were dying to be who they are, dying to be what they were meant to contribute to the larger ecosystem. That's what we're looking at doing. Today, in my experience, and I think most people's experience, we are really disconnected from nature. We don't know the source of our drinking water. We think it comes out of a tap. It doesn't come out of a tap, it comes out of a watershed. Where's that at, and how healthy is it? We eat food that's been enriched because the soil isn't nutrient enough to be able to provide what it needs in order for our bodies to digest it. And by the way, our bodies have seasonality. We eat foods that are out of season for our bodies. And the consequence of that, obesity. And we see this with businesses. What is fructose sugar doing in ketchup, for goodness sakes? Obesity, diabetes, health issues. Mortality rate in the U.S. is declining, and we're the only advanced country in which that's true. We want to take a look at what nature can show us. There's 8 billion people on this planet. Every single one of them will be dead, including you, including me, in 100 years. We're not getting out of this alive. What are we dying for? And we've all heard this aphorism, something to die for. And that's the question I want us to look at. What are we dying for that is meaningful and is purposeful? Nature, for me, is the ultimate business guru. I've spent my career in business. And when we start looking at nature through the lens of what it can teach us some incredible things about how to structure our economies and how to run our businesses. In this forest, and this is very similar to a forest that I grew up in, everything is intertwined. Everything is overlapping. Everything is included. It's lush. It's pregnant with possibility. It's absolutely teeming with life that's dying so that the next moment can live the promise of that tiny death. Now, there's an ecologist out of the University of British Columbia by the name of Suzanne Simard. She studied these boreal forests for years, and she's come to the conclusion that trees are actually social beings. Think about that. Trees are social beings. They actually exchange nutrients with each other. They help each other. And in fact, they communicate about insect pests with each other. If there's an infestation of bark beetles, as an example, a tree will set off a pheromone, and it's caught in the wind, and it goes downwind, and it signals to other trees, there's danger ahead. You go underground, there's a whole mycorrhizal fungus structure. It's an intricate web that connects the roots of every single tree in the forest. And it's a communication web. All the trees are continuously communicating with each other, and not just species to species. If there's a sudden birth that was unplanned, unaccounted for, this mycorrhizal network will send out messages to the trees that are actually fruiting trees, and there's a phenomenon called masting, where all of a sudden, simultaneously, these trees will produce fruit for this unexpected influx of a new population of critters. Life is a web of constantly evolving relationships, and that's the key. It's all about relationship. Nature's currency, how it transacts its business, is through communication. The mindset is one of connection. There's more than enough. Biodiversity leads to stability, which leads to resilience. Forests are incredibly resilient because of the connection, because of the communication. And the default purpose of nature is thriving. Again, Suzanne Simard, when she thinks about this and when she writes about it, she talks about the sharing of resources, creating a healthy community that benefits all, not just some, but all. And when you back up and take a big macro look at things, nature really is, from an economic perspective, it's the only truly free economy. There are no self-serving interests. There are no artificial constraints in nature. Action is based on the presumption that we're all connected. It's all one. Adam Smith called this enlightened self-interest. You think about the wealth of nations, and that was the model for what we call capitalism today. The Theory of Moral Sentiment is a book he wrote 17 years before that, and partly the reason he wrote that book was he was concerned about man's natural proclivity to self-interest, selfishness. And his point was that the truly virtuous person is going to be somebody, and this is kind of the net of his book, the truly virtuous person will be doing things because they feel obligated to others. Obligated to others. Enlightened self-interest. Now, this is a picture of, obviously, an English garden. For me, and I think for Adam Smith, it is also a model of a sustainable business economy. It's very structured. The basis for the invisible hands is enlightened self-interest. This is a thoughtful, curated economy. It restrains and it tames man's ungoverned urges for self-interest. That's the whole idea behind this. From a seasonal perspective, this is always in bloom. It's always producing. One plant doesn't dominate. One plant doesn't take all of the resources. The currency of this kind of an environment is cooperation. And as a matter of fact, if you start thinking about the forest again, birch trees in a forest will actually feed fir seedlings, and they'll generally feed fir trees in general. And the opposite happens in the fall and winter when the birches lose their trees. The firs will feed the birch trees. Why in the world would a birch tree feed a fir tree? Because they're interconnected, because they're all interdependent, and that's what we're working with here. The mindset of this sort of an economy, if you will, is order and predictability. Markets like predictability. Markets like order. So this is designed very specifically for that to occur, while at the same time encouraging thriving with elegance. And I use the word elegant very specifically here. Elegance means no unintended consequences. You design it for thriving so that there are no unintended consequences. And speaking of unintended consequences, this is today's economic model. In the 19th century, John Stuart Mills, who was an economist, came up with an idea that he called the economic man. And the economic man was a model for how capitalists were supposed to function. Self-interest, get yours, take the most, sequester, isolate, accumulate. And that became the model for how businesses ran up until and through the 80s and the 90s, and even today. It's starting to change a little bit here. Ayn Rand in 1967, the philosopher and the writer, said that capitalism is the only morally valid social political system because it allows people to be free to act, and this is the important part, in their rational self-interest. Rational self-interest is fundamentally different than enlightened self-interest. And what we see on this screen is the consequence of that. The currency of this model, literally, is accumulation. Whoever dies with the most toys wins. Accumulation. You don't find accumulation in nature. Where you do find it, it's dead. The Dead Sea comes to mind. The mindset is win-lose, zero-sum. It's predicated on a notion of separation and scarcity. It's an abundant universe, but we don't act as if it is. And the default purpose as a consequence of this is surviving. When you hear conversation in this environment, what you'll hear and what you'll see are actions taken based on the notion of, I have rights, damn it. I have rights. You'll see it societally, you'll see it economically. It's different than I have obligations. Very different. Rational self-interest. We have to start thinking differently. Change the default mindset of business leaders, change the default mindset of society. Nature's answer for thriving in a diverse ecosystem with competing needs, connection, distribution, communication. It's that simple. Connection, distribution, communication. It's everywhere we look in nature. You can't not find it. Open communication is the lifeblood of a free market, and freely exchanged information allows for and enables enlightened self-interest. It truly does. The purpose of nature, as I've mentioned, is to enhance the possibility of thriving. Nature's economy is an economy fueled by a desire to improve and contribute rather than produce and consume. Very different. This is true at the macro level. It's also true at the micro level. When you look at your body, your body's organized the same way. How do you do this? And how is that design possible? Everything in nature is designed to thrive. It's interconnected. It's all part of a single ecosystem. Interdependent. Enlightened, not rational self-interest. It's conservative. And by conservative, I mean it's designed for recycling. Nothing goes to waste. Absolutely nothing goes to waste. Everything gets used. And for me, one of the key pieces here is that everything in nature operates as a center of distribution, not as a center of accumulation. Everything is always flowing to and through. It's a center of distribution. When we think of the purpose of business, business is the most pervasive force on this planet. There's nothing on this planet that escapes the touch of business's activities today. It's man's greatest and potentially, I think, one of the most catastrophic inventions we've ever come up with, unless we get our act together around this. If we start to think differently, we would start to question what the purpose of business is. It's not like Milton Friedman wrote back in the 1960s to create a profit. It's not either to deliver goods and services. That's what businesses do, but that's not the purpose. And it certainly isn't to enhance shareholder value. The purpose of business is the same as the purpose of nature, to enhance the possibility of thriving. That's the purpose of business. And if you're doing that as a business, you will have people clamoring to buy your product and service. You will not want for customers. Thriving today is currently an aspiration. Surviving is the norm. And thriving is consistent with an economy that's fueled by a desire to improve rather than consume. And that's a big distinction. Enlightened self-interest. Think how this might play out. Really, think about this. If you were, as a consumer, if you as a business leader, as a business owner, started to embrace this notion that you are part of a single ecosystem, business taking responsibility for the whole, not just my quarterly result, but for the whole. Everything becomes interconnected. It's all interconnected. We see ourselves, we recognize ourselves as part of a larger ecosystem, and we behave as such. All stakeholders have an opportunity to survive. It's interdependence. Enlightened, not rational self-interest, all of a sudden living wages because we're taking care of each other. We're interconnected. You can't win if I'm not winning. I'm not going to win if you're not winning. It's conservative, designing for recycling, minimizing environmental impact by doing business. And as a center of distribution, not of accumulation. Social responsibility with impact built into the business that you operate. The net of this would be really similar, I think, to what doctors do. First, do no harm. First, do no harm. When we start thinking of ourselves as business owners and as businesses as centers of distribution, we become conscious of connections. Nature's got a lot to teach us about how to live and how to work. And when the student's ready, the teacher appears. Nature's here. We're invited to learn from it. Right now we've got two economic models to contrast. One is the current one, which is a quid pro quo model. It's transactional, rational self-interest rules. This is a model that I believe leads to the greatest divisions that we have in society today. Gender inequality, racial inequality, wealth disparity, all can be traced back to the toxicity of this model. Nature's economy is a compassionate capitalism model. The invisible hands work underground. They're out. They really are invisible. It's not inherently transactional. It's reinforced by connection. You win, I win. It's compassionate capitalism based on connection. And like nature, much of the work, like I said, is done underground. And I want you to make no mistake, I'm not naive. I've been in this business a long time. We're programmed for rational self-interest. The question is, how do you do this? How do we do this? You start simply. You start with yourself. You start with your business. In my business, we've got a social impact partner that we work with. That we, all of my IP is available to them. They make big differences in sub-Saharan Africa. My work is in leadership. We're working with leaders to enhance and improve the quality of life in some of the most desperately needed areas of the world. Money goes that direction from us as well. How do you, or how will you do this? Now, this sounds like utopia. And it actually is, in one sense. But when you look at this, and I'm just going to, this quotation up here, a map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out one country at which humanity is always landing. And when humanity lands, it looks out again and sees a better country, and it sets sail one more time. Progress is the realization of successive utopias. This is Oscar Wilde. Between our first breath and our last breath, what are you doing? I want to die now as nature does. I want to die creatively. I want to die each moment with a meaning attached to it, with a purpose, a meaningful death rather than a meaningless life. In my pocket, and you just saw that coin flash by, I carry a coin. On that coin is the words Memento Mori. Remember, you must die. This is one of Marcus Aurelius's favorite quotes. And this is what I would invite you to actually consider as you walk out of here today. You're going to die. We're all dying. And I don't mean this in the macro sense. I mean every day, every moment that goes by. Does it have purpose? Does it have meaning? How do I bring that to life in the next moment? Die a meaningful and purpose-filled life each moment. That's my invitation to you. Thank you.